This is Fred Willis, who's President and CEO of HPN Neurologic. He just happens to be an ex-NFL football player also. And we're going to talk about first Fred's background, and then about NFL football and traumatic brain injury, TBI in general. So Fred, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you. I played 9 years in the National Football League, and as you mentioned, I'm President and CEO of HPN Neurologic.
Who did you play? What position did you play?
I was a running back, and I played with the Cincinnati Bengals, Houston Oilers, and Denver Broncos.
Did your head get bounced around very much, or?
Yes, typically there's so much said in the media today about concussions in football, and certainly I suffered a number of concussions while I played.
Were you actually knocked out?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And you feel that it's changed aspects of how your brain works, and do you see it in your life, reflected in your life?
Yeah, unfortunately, I had a pretty serious illness for about 4 years, where one of the conditions of the illness was that I experienced severe symptoms of encephalopathy.
Right.
And as you know, encephalopathy, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, is what's going on with the retired NFL players now. And that has been brought on by a series of concussions that the players suffered over the history of their football careers, probably from the time they were a Pee Wee football player all the way through till their experience playing in the National Football League.
Do you have close relations, still in touch with some of your former comrades in arms who are really suffering from this?
Yes, HPN Neurologic is really going to go out on the forefront of the TBI issue. Part of our company is made up of ex-NFL football players, and Jack Youngblood, who played for Los Angeles Rams and is in the NFL Hall of Fame, is part of my company. And we also have an ex-NFL player, Kenny Green, who had a long career with the St. Louis Cardinals and San Diego Chargers. So all three of us have sort of accepted the responsibility, if you will, to seek out retired NFL players who are suffering from traumatic brain injury, and use our device, which is HPN, High Performance Neurofeedback, which treats the symptoms of traumatic brain injury.
Can you say something about the study you're planning to do?
Well, right now we're getting ready to start up in the next 30 days 2 major studies. The first one is going to be undertaken in Los Angeles. And we are working through the National Football League Players Association Retired Players chapter in Los Angeles. And I'm also working with around 30 NFLPA retired chapters throughout the country. But we're starting this project, the clinical research study in Los Angeles, of which you are going to be overseeing that study, along with Julie Anton, who was our research scientist. So what we're trying to do there is, through a very serious process, confidential process, reach out to these retired players who are members of the Los Angeles chapter, and seek out the ones that are suffering from traumatic brain injury. And we're going to get those guys into treatment with our HPN device.
So besides the upcoming study with the ex-NFL football players, is there any other studies in the pipeline?
Yes, there are. Within the next 30 to 60 days, HPN Neurologic is going to undertake a clinical series analysis study with the Navy SEALs. As you know, which is so prevalent now in the media, probably the two most talked about issues with regard to traumatic brain injury are the military and the NFL.
Right.
So we are undertaking research in both of those areas and delving into the issues of traumatic brain injury with retired players, and we're starting up a study with the Navy SEALs. We feel that the SEAL study is going to be quite interesting because it's going to be a mixed group of Navy SEALs who are at the point of retirement as part of our population, and then the other part of the population will be retired Navy SEALs. So these guys obviously are, have suffered tremendous blast damage throughout their service, and they've got extensive traumatic brain injury. So we're very excited about seeing how HPN can effectively help these guys improve the quality of their life, and certainly they deserve it because of who they are and what they stand for and how they've served this country. So we're very excited about that.
And then I want to mention a third study that will begin very soon.
Right.
And this is affiliated with UCSD, University of California at San Diego, where we'll be treating retired military, specifically Marines,
Yes.
who have suffered from TBI.
Yes.
And there'll be very, very sophisticated imagery mechanisms using magnetic encephalograms, MRI. Will be a very, very high-tech and I think a very important study. So I'm very much looking forward to see the results of that.
We're very excited about that study in particular because if the study goes well and we get the results we think we're going to get with HPN, then there's very good possibility that study could be the forefront of a double-blind study that could possibly be undertaken with regard to traumatic brain injury. And I think, as far as I know, I think it would be the first double-blind study regarding traumatic brain injury ever undertaken. So that'll be quite significant. Stephen and David, we're so excited about these studies with the retired NFL players and the issue of TBI, but I think it's important to note or maybe mention a little bit about what these players, retired players who have gotten multiple concussions over their careers are now the symptoms that they're suffering from. It is amazing. People I don't think realize what these NFL players are going through right now, and I would cite, everyone is aware of the number of suicides that have occurred in the last few years with NFL players like Junior Seau, Dave Dorson, and such. Actually, I think there's been 16 suicides in the National Football League in the last 2 years. And this is something that is an epidemic, and really this is the focus of HPN Neurologic. We want to get in and see if we can stem those conditions that they're suffering now, stop them, put them off, relieve it in any way we can. And you guys, as you know, you guys are the expert on how this neurofeedback works. But we feel that we can really, make a huge change in how these guys are behaving right now, and how their lives are being affected. And the unfortunate thing about traumatic brain injury is that, it's not that our brothers in the NFL who have this horrible disease are suffering in silence. But, we know for a fact that it's affecting their families, it affects their children. Some of these guys are turning to alcoholism, drug addiction, heavy drug use, to offset these horrible conditions. So, just to sort of enlighten people on really what these symptoms are and what it's like to have mid-stage or TBI, because really in the case of the Junior Seals and the other 16 players in the National Football League that committed suicide, they were really end-stage CTE. They were at the end, and CTE, as you know, or TBI, is a progressive disease. There's no cure for it, and at some point it's over. And I think that these guys, with the horrible condition that they were experiencing at the time, really opted for suicide rather than continue to live the way they did.
Yeah.
So this is what HPN Neurologic is all about. This is what we're going to do. We're going to attack this issue, especially with the NFL, especially with our distinguished war veterans who deserve better than what they're getting right now.
Absolutely, Fred. I think they do, and I'm hoping that my colleague Mary Lee will join us in a little bit, because she is really one of the world's experts in traumatic brain injury, and her about to come out book, Conquering Concussion, has the historical aspect, the medical aspect, the social behavioral aspect, and the cure for how neurofeedback has worked really to ameliorate something that modern medicine and modern neurology has no answer for. When the players or people who have been in auto accidents, or even the military guys, come in to see their doctors, they shake their heads and say, get plenty of rest. And they don't know what else to do. They don't have the understanding of the brain dynamics that is necessary. A great mentor of mine was a neuropsychologist named Roland Parker. And I think it was at either the American Association of Applied Psychophysiology and Biofeedback or the ISNR, International Society for Neurofeedback and Research, that he gave this brilliant paper in which he said, you're talking about head injury, but look at the whole body. Look at the digestive system, the immune system, the ability to sleep comfortably at night. Or one of the first ex-football players that I worked with, he could do nothing but sleep. He slept 16 hours a day, and his family was saying, my God, you got to wake this man up. So the form which the injury takes is legion. And it depends on the genetic history of the person, their metabolic and constitutional makeup, the number of injuries they've had. If they've had more than one injury, the complexities go up exponentially. And this is really being studied now by people who understand microbiology.
What's going on right now is that we all know there's no cure for traumatic brain injury, but so we're seeing now in the last couple of years, since the National Football League and the Armed Forces have sort of come out of denial about the TBI issue, that guys are at some point now being diagnosed possibly with CTE. Well, the problem is, and this is why HBN is so dynamic, is that even our retired football players that we're speaking with right now, that we're getting ready to start to treat, they know they have TBI, and in some cases, like Tony Dorsett last week came out and said that he had somehow been examined, and they told him that he had traumatic brain injury, CTE. But even so, what are we going to do about it? And the people that are living with this disease, really the only options they have, or one of the great options they have, is the treatment of HPN with this. It's one thing to be determined that you have CTE, but what do you do about it?
Yeah.
What do you do about it? Once most of these guys knew already that they had it, so finally somebody figures it out and says, well, you definitely have it. Well, what happens now? And this is where we are with our research and our treatment procedures, where we're going to be out there, and we feel that we're an option to attack that.
I think that there are three levels, Fred, of how people are likely to recover from traumatic brain injury. Number one is a supportive family. And we all know that it's the wives of these injured players that have brought the lawsuit to the attention of the NFL and pushed it through. So number one is a supportive family. Number two is an adequate environment, which includes nutrition, adequate nutrition, because the brain can't rebuild itself unless we have those complex molecules available. They're the raw materials of rebuilding. And the third thing is neurofeedback. And neurofeedback followed then by physical therapy, occupational therapy, and that kind of thing. Neurotherapy is important because the brain has its own neuroprotective mechanisms, and it goes into a kind of a shutdown, like a seizure, to protect itself. And so there are areas of the brain that are walled off to stop itself from seizing. And when that happens, you have what are called functional shutdowns in the brain, and they are vast. People can't think their way out of a paper bag. Their memories are shot. Their ability to solve problems are shot. Particularly if they've been hit in the front of the head, their executive functions are really pretty much missing. And neurofeedback can do an awful lot to kind of coax the brain into restoring those areas. They're not always long axonal shearing. There are damage to the neurotransmitter environment, intracellular damage, especially with military blast injuries now. We know that what happens inside the cell is as important as what happens between the cells, including the neurons. So neurofeedback is wonderful, and I think HPN is going a long way towards being able to really help these people.
Are you able to, what percentage do you find benefiting from neurofeedback and HPN in that treatment?
Well, pretty high percentage. I mean, it depends on how far gone people are, and do they have symptoms of early onset Alzheimer's or that kind of thing, or beta amyloid plaques in the brain. There are certain kinds of irreversible things that you can't change, but if you catch people early enough in the process, the brain is neurologically plastic and it will rebuild itself.
Mary Lee, Esty, I've been looking forward to meeting you for quite some time.
Me, you. Finally.
And one of the experts on traumatic brain injury. You've been in the field a long time. Maybe you could give us enough background on you so we can get a better sense of who you are and
Sure.
the kinds of experience you have.
Yeah, I'm a social worker by license. Got involved in biofeedback first in '88. With my training was at the Medical Clinic, which was the biofeedback place in the United States. Great people. Purchased their little alpha theta machine. A great device. They did wonderful things with it. Used it on myself first, gradually on patients, and then J&J came out with a really good system that was called the I-410, which had the EEG biofeedback as well as all the physiological biofeedback. I wanted it all in one package, and that was wonderful. I was treating a lot of cancer patients back then, people to help them die as well as cope with their chemotherapy. And it was about that time that I ran into this other system with Linux and just saw amazing things happening. So in 1996, actually it was 95, I called the Adrian Pugh Berman, who was the physician with the then new Office of Alternative Medicine at NIH, and told her, I said, I've got a new therapy here that's doing really unusual things, and it's the kind of thing you really ought to be interested in. So they sent Dr. John Spencer out, and he had had some experience at the University of Chicago with EEG research with rats. So he knew a little bit, and on the phone he said, I've got 2 hours that day, that's all I've got. He stayed 4 hours. When he left, he said, I've never seen anything like this. Within the year, I was asked to accept an NIH grant to treat mild to moderate head injury. And that was done with Kessler Rehabilitation Hospital in New Jersey. I did all the treatment. It was a waitlist controlled study, 12 people chosen on the belief at the time that they would never be better. They ranged from 3 to 21 years post-injury. I'll be showing a video tomorrow night.
Great.
The one who's 21 years post-injury. So we had these 12 people. They were never going to be better. When we finished, 7 of them went back to work at their previous jobs. So, I've done nothing else since. I've treated over 2,300 people now. I think Stephen was asked, what's your percentage rate? He said, good, it's definitely good. I have a spreadsheet with everyone I've ever treated, and no matter what the condition, it's better than 66% positive outcome. Now that includes people who've had stroke. The average treatment number of sessions till we're done is 16. So there was another study with fibromyalgia done with Rush Presbyterian Hospital in Chicago. And then when all the news of the veterans coming back with these horrible injuries and just awful stories, I wondered if people would respond to this treatment for blast injury, because it's a very different kind of injury. As the pressure wave moves through the body, you get this high pressure and then a vacuum, high pressure and vacuum, all in milliseconds. And I know now that not only is there collapsing and expanding of organs in the body, but there's a hydraulic pressure, so the blood is being forced into the brain, up and down, like mini strokes in less than a second. So I began treating people who were at Walter Reed. The therapists there were not allowed to refer out. However, one of the head therapists at the Deployment Health Clinical Center started sending people because they just didn't know what to do with them. It was a pilot study. I had no funding for it. I treated 8 people. Several had attempted suicide, either guns or other things, and finally admitted after we started that they were planning to do it again. One of those is now pursuing a PhD in neuroscience. Another one couldn't read. He was a Marine. He'd been blown up twice in Iraq near the Syrian border, and his nickname was Superman because he'd been thrown 30 feet or more through the air, landing on his spine and neck. So he was 1.5 inches shorter, walking with a cane. The general referred him because the headaches were so horrible. He'd given up taking any medication because he said, if I take the meds, I can't think at all. So he's putting up with the headache in order to be able to think, but he couldn't read. He could not read anymore. He was going to restaurants that had pictures because he could point to the picture. This was a guy who'd had some college. Well, I've learned over all these years, never assume somebody can't be better, no matter what's going on. After 4 sessions, his headaches were going away. Pretty soon, he's showing up without a cane. I said, well, my balance is better. That's another thing. The vestibular system gets messed up. Then he's running. Pretty soon, I'm in Bethesda, Maryland, he's running around the Washington Mall. And then he says, it was after the 4th session, he was accompanying the general somewhere. And he was a liaison between the Marines and the Army because there was no way he was ever going to serve again. This was just a thing that they gave him to do while he awaited his med boards for retirement. And he said, there was a presentation the general was making, I suddenly wanted to write. I've never written anything. He grabbed some paper, he started writing. He has now written screenplays, he's had stuff published, and it was just amazing to watch. And then he says, I want to re-up and go back. Oh my God, what are you doing? You're 1.5 inches shorter, you've got this crushed vertebra, they don't grow back, So, he did. He passed the physical, he went back. He got wounded again. And so he's in the new study I'm doing now with the traumatic injury program at USIS, Military Medical School. Now, he's completely back again, and he has a 4-year scholarship to one of the top universities, and has created his own program there in the arts and psychology. So never say never. You could always be better.
But what you originally started was really a forerunner of HPN. Is
It was
that
a
right?
forerunner of HPN, a forerunner of a lot of things. I'm still using it because it works so well, and because I've got research studies going on, so I can't change equipment now, but I'm looking forward to using HPN. And I urge anyone, if you can get HPN, do it. If you can't, get some kind of neurofeedback, because it's going to help. There's no doubt about it.
Why do you think it's taken so long? You know, you've had such dramatic results. Why hasn't it spread wider than it has?
Well, my personal opinion is that all kinds of biofeedback systems are out there, and neurofeedback being one kind of biofeedback. The problem has been that clinicians will get very, very tied to what they're doing, and then they decide that they can do something slightly different. And so you've got a lot of different systems that do different things, but they're all competing with each other. Nobody's had a business approach. Nobody's approached it in the way that will provide structure, will provide confidence, and most of all the research, which is why I'm doing the research, because you can tell all the stories you want, but if you haven't got numbers, you know, people, the institutions are not going to get interested.
I just want to comment for a minute on the story you told, and I see that so often in my patients. Actually, in a woman I'm treating for TBI and balance problems, she always had a terrible temper, you know, before the injury.
Oh, the temper.
And she would drive her family crazy. And then now all of a sudden, not only regaining her balance, but she has this newfound ability and calmness, and her family is.
So say, who are you?
So she's an example of what we so often see: somebody's better than well. They're
Right,
better off
right.
than before the injury.
Yeah, I think the most serious person who was referred by the Walter Reed clinician is a fellow who he had served in Bosnia, had such severe PTSD, and I mean he had lots of blast injuries. His record said he should never be deployed again, ever. So of course they sent him to Iraq, right? I mean, what are you going to do? You're not to be deployed, so let's send him to Iraq. When he came back, he was in a training at, I think, Fort Hood. They were training other folks, and they had a simulated situation. And the next thing he knew, he woke up in the hospital. He had attempted to kill the other trainer because they had been shouting in Pashtun and
Right.
whatever.
Right.
And he just had a total meltdown and flashback. So he was married, he had 4 kids, loved his family, but he was so explosive, his wife started divorce proceedings. He had been jailed in the civilian jails as well as the military. In Iraq, a round hit the forehead of his helmet, didn't penetrate. He was told that the MRI showed damage. They would never let him see it. So he was terribly impulsive. He tried suicide by cop.
Oh, God.
He tried suicide by pills. Well, that didn't work. When I finished with him, his wife had stopped divorce proceedings and he had rejoined his family. He was a great guy. He was so upset that he couldn't control himself.
Right.
But, you know, haven't heard anything more because if you don't hear him, that's good.
Right,
You know,
right.
It's
No
usually
news
pretty
is
good.
good news.
That's pretty good. The second study I did, funded study, was for fibromyalgia with the Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center in Chicago. And that came about because of a woman, a social worker actually, who was in the NIH-funded study for TBI. She was a lovely person. They all were great people. She had been hit by a bus and had been unable to work for 10 years. At the time she was hit, she was head of a program at some hospital in Pennsylvania. And she could be awake. She was a therapist. She could be awake 2 hours at a time. It would take her all morning to get ready to go. She could see 2 clients a day, so she'd take her all morning to get ready to go to her office. She'd see a client for an hour, rest for 2 hours, see another client. That was about it for the day. After the third treatment, she found she could read again. She was fully functional. Her energy was back. She had a normal sleep cycle. Well, she knew someone who knew somebody in Chicago. And I got a call from this lovely lady in Chicago, said, I've had fibromyalgia for 30 years. I just got out of the hospital. And I told my husband, if someone doesn't do something, I'm calling Dr. Kevorkian.
Dr. Death.
Dr. Death, yes. She said, can you help me? And I said, I have no idea. The reason she called was that the woman I had treated who had been hit by a bus had been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. So it was post-traumatic fibromyalgia. And she was completely well. In fact, she worked for me eventually, went back to work full-time. So I told her, I said, I don't know if we can help you. Well, she came, started in May of 98, or sorry, April of 98. She had to have someone, she was 70 years old, she had to have someone help her walk down a hallway. She couldn't. Her balance was so bad, she'd up off the walls, so she had to hold on to somebody. A lot of pain. So that was May of 98. In July, she played golf without pain. So her husband had been very successful in his business. He came to me, and because she would come for a week or two at a time, go back to Chicago, and come, go back. So he came to me in June, and he said, I want to fund a study. Will you write up something? But it can't be more than 1 page. And that's all. That was the guidance. 1-page document for a study. Well, I didn't know what that meant, so I did an outline. Handed it to him. It was about $300,000. And he said, well, will this make a difference? I said, well, it's a pilot study. He said, do it again. So I came up with something about $700,000. And he said, okay. I have a note in my desk. His note saying, as of July, there'll be $1 million deposited at Rush Presbyterian for your study. Well, it was, of course, they didn't, those doctors out there didn't know what was going on, right? I mean, who's this crazy lady in Esty who's doing this weird stuff? But, you know, we've got $1 million in the account, we've got to do something with it, and he said, do this. So they asked me to come out, and so these guys all walk in their white coats, and the first one says, where's the animal study? I had this image. At the time, we were using glasses with embedded LEDs flashing. We thought that was the therapy. It turns out it wasn't. And that's another part of this story. So I imagine pigs running around with little glasses on, you know. But the study was reasonably successful. But then he asked me, he said, what else would you like to do? And I said, well, I think, and this is where Neurologic comes in.
HPN.
This is where HPN comes in. Can you deal with that? I'll say it again. This is where HPN comes in. I said, well, I think this equipment is doing something that we don't know about. Because I was supervising people who were using it, and they would at times forget to plug these little LED glasses in. But people were still having positive responses. And they didn't know. You know. So I said, well, I'd really like to know what's going on here. So he gave $100,000, and Lawrence Livermore Labs tested it. And that's when we got the confirmation. You don't need these glasses. You know, the equipment is doing its own thing. Mm-hmm. And so that's how that set the path to get where we are today. Mm-hmm. And for the future, I think.
I think so too. Thank you, Mary Lee, for coming and talking with us today. I would just ask you to say a word or two about your book that's coming out now.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's called Conquering Concussion. It's an outgrowth of a rash statement I made to Carol Shiflett that I would like a small brochure about concussion and TBI for my waiting room for my clients. And we're now at 280 pages and slightly growing. We're almost done. But it's really an outgrowth of, well, first, over the years of confusion about the weird, weird things that ER docs, excuse me, and other physicians tell people who obviously have had head injuries and concussion. I mean, just weird stuff. And then terrible frustration about how to help them, especially when it involves, legal proceedings where the testing and evaluation is so poor that people who are seriously injured are told basically they're malingering, they're making it up. So we need more research, we need the documentation. And then finally, just the determination to get something out there. The book is written for the lay public, for anybody at any level to read and understand the symptoms. We have a long list of symptoms, huge list of symptoms. One you left out is dysautonomia, feeling cold all the time, because the pituitary and the thyroid get messed up. And the Iraqi guys, the OEF, OIF people come back saying, well, I ask, that's one of the things we ask and track. And they say, well, of course I feel cold, it's so hot over there, it's cold here. But their body temperature's normalized. And they can't believe it. So I'm like, wow, this is happening. I'm treating a fellow now who's terrible PTSD, and he writhes and he's grabbed his wife's hair in the night, he doesn't know what he's doing, he's reliving stuff. That's going away.
Well, I think one of
All
the
of
things
that
that's
happens.
really fantastic is that we're treating PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, at the same time that we're treating TBI. They're not
Right.
separate, and
No, they're not.
we're dealing with them both at the same time. And there's a high statistical correlation of having them both together.
Oh, right. Colonel Hogue at Walter Reed did a study with about 2,200 OEF, OIF vets. Their goal was to establish criteria so that they could separate the two diagnoses. This would be helpful, right? Well, they couldn't do it. You cannot do it. If you're in a life-threatening situation, and certainly if you're in combat, and you have a concussion, whether you're picked up by a blast and thrown, or you're hit by something, and certainly people are always trying to kill you, you better be hypervigilant.
Yep.
So, yeah, this is a multi-symptom study, and I'm delighted to hear about the studies you're going to be doing because we need the documentation.
Yes.
We need the proof, we need the imaging. Imaging has its limits, but it's the best we've got. And the more you can see, the more you can quantify, then the naysayers will have to say, maybe we should do this thing that doesn't involve medication. We have this huge correlation between the military, the NFL. I mean, I'm treating young football, hockey players, and, I just cringe at the idea of 5-year-olds wearing helmets and doing contact. It should be a crime. It should literally be absolutely prohibited. They're going to ruin those kids' lives.
Well, thank you for coming with us today and speaking with us.
Delighted to be here.